Article 5 threatens left and no dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the Millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer on the other side of the camera. Welcome, everyone, to Mark and the Millennials. This podcast is called Article 5 Threatens the Left. That would be Article 5 of the United States Constitution. And Article 5 of the United States Constitution allows the Constitution to be amended by the states. And there's an organization called the Convention of States that is trying to get passed a bill in the state legislatures across the United States of America that allows the Constitution to be amended. So Article 5, this is on the Convention of States website, and I'm going to read this to you, and it's short about Article 5, and then talk to you about how the Convention of States is making progress on this, and how the left, and here's the real kicker, okay? How the left is freaking out that the Convention of States organization and movement is gaining steam in the United States of America. The left is now noticing, and by noticing, I'm talking about people at the very top of the country, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. They're noticing, and they are incredibly, incredibly worried and intimidated because it would effectively take away their power at the federal level. So Article 5 of the United States Constitution gives the states, okay, the 50 states, the power to call a convention of states so that those states can propose amendments to the United States Constitution. It takes 34 states to call a convention of states. And then those 34 states in that convention, which is the minimum number of states required to call a convention of states, can propose and pass amendments to the United States Constitution. And then afterwards, 38 states are required to ratify those amendments that are proposed. Okay, so ultimately, you only need 34 states to have a convention. You know, it's a convention of states. And then you need 38 states after that to say, okay, we are going to ratify what was proposed in the Convention of States. And now those proposals, after 38 states agree, become part of the United States Constitution. And so the Convention of States organization has been making progress on this call for a Convention of States for the purpose of, among other things, requiring term limits and to remove and push back on federal power and federal overreach, which is obviously something that everyone who listens to this podcast, whether you're on the left or the right, should agree is a big problem. Okay? When you have a government at the federal level that has caused inflation and is making you poorer, and is trying to do everything for everyone, that is not the function and never was supposed to be the function of the federal government. If you want those things to be the function of government, then you can vote for those things at the state level. And then your state government can take on those particular functions if that's what you really want. But they're not supposed to be. We're not supposed to have a federal government that takes on everything for everyone, pays for everything, forces states to require transgender surgeries and then pay for them. I mean, we can just go on and on and on about the things. And it's not just the social issues, folks. It's about, right now, it's equally important to talk about the economic issues and how the federal government is just out of control. So the left, and this is why we're talking about this, the left is threatened by this movement because the left has actually awakened. They realize that COS is a threat. Why is COS a threat? Because, ladies and gentlemen, it takes 34 states to call a convention of states pursuant to Article 5 in the United States Constitution. Currently, there are 19 states in the United States who have called for and passed a Convention of States resolution. Okay? So 19 states already have signed on. And the most recent states to sign on this year, okay, in 2022, is West Virginia and South Carolina. South Carolina is number 19. West Virginia is number 18. And so what I would like to do is to play for you a debate that occurred in the West Virginia House of Delegates, where good people who are members of the West Virginia House of Delegates have decided to push back and to call for an Article 5 Convention of States and pass it. And my understanding is in West Virginia, it passed the West Virginia House of Delegates and Senate in like 2 days or 3 days. And then the governor signed it right away. I mean, and why? Because in West Virginia, if West Virginia decides that it wants to power its economy and power its homes and its businesses with coal, then they should be allowed to do so because they are a state, okay? If you live in a state like New York and your state doesn't want that, then guess what? Your state doesn't have to use coal because you can vote for representatives who don't want to use coal. Each state has the right to govern itself. But West Virginia is being made poorer. And by poorer, I mean to the point where the vast majority of West Virginians could be in poverty because their economy does, in many respects, revolve around tourism as well as, of course, coal. And the Biden administration wants to just put them out of business. They want to crush people in red states in every respect imaginable. That is not the function of the federal government, ladies and gentlemen. It's not what they're supposed to do. Since when is the federal government supposed to be involved in what kind of energy is generated and how it's generated in your particular state? That is up to your state, okay? And if your state wants to cooperate with surrounding states, so be it. That would be a good thing, I would think, in some cases, certainly on the grid, right? The electric grid that transport the electricity that is generated, that would probably make good sense. And if you live in California and you want your state to be powered only by wind and solar, and those are the only things that are acceptable, then guess what? You can elect representatives in California who will then pass, and have, by the way, passed, laws to do just that. That's up to you. But guess what? You're also going to pay for the consequences in California. Don't ask the other 49 states to bail you out when you voted for stupidity, namely the fact that you're going to have brownouts. In other words, you're not going to have electricity during certain periods of the day and certain times of the year because wind and solar are not up to prime time. But the federal government wants to dictate every aspect of what the states do and what you and I do. That is not their function. And so I'm giving you this example on energy about the Convention of States because West Virginia decided, you know what? We know we are a, relatively speaking, poor state, okay, compared to the other states. And we know that we are, relatively speaking, a very small state in terms of population. But here's the thing. There is a way for the minority to be protected in the United States Constitution. That is the brilliance of the Founding Fathers. And one way for the minority to be protected is through a convention of states outlined in Article 5 of the United States Constitution. So I want to play for you podcast listeners the West Virginia debate. I have 3 clips on the debate on the House of Delegates floor in West Virginia about the Convention of States. And if you want to hear true patriots in the United States of America talk about how the power needs to be returned to the states and to the people from the federal government, it would be this particular debate in West Virginia, which happened this year. South Carolina, similarly, but we only have time to play the West Virginia debate. Here is the first clip. Here it is.
We are proud West Virginians and Americans who want to pursue life and liberty without a tyrannical government involving itself in every aspect of our lives.
I defended our country and our Constitution for 28 years.
I swore an oath when I enlisted to serve my country.
Combat veteran. I'm a retired U.S. Army infantry officer.
United States Marine Corps corporal.
I'm a retired Master Sergeant of the U.S. Air Force.
I'm a former corporal of the USMC.
I'm retired disabled Sergeant First Class, U.S. Army.
I am a proud daughter of the American Revolution.
Ladies and gentlemen, the perpetuity of this great union is in jeopardy.
Yes, so there you have one of the debates. We have 3 clips on this from the West Virginia House of Delegates floor where they're debating. And they're debating, and actually, you know what they sound like? These individuals who are elected officials to the House of Delegates in West Virginia sound like, actually, they're having a constitutional convention. Almost sounds like the Founding Fathers, and how important it is for power to be returned to the people. And I know that you must also agree with this by and large. Look, if you're a Democrat, you listen to this podcast, you're probably saying, no, the federal government, there must be one way, and there must be one way of doing things. We can't have 50 different ways of doing things. That's nonsense, of course. It's utter nonsense, because a federal government that is all powerful becomes a tyrannical government, which is what our federal government has become. And I want to make something crystal clear to all of you. It has become a tyrannical government under Republicans and Democrats. Republicans who are silent because they just want to remain elected, and Democrats who never ending want to make government bigger and bigger and do more and more things for every single person in the country, which is not the function of the federal government. It is, once again, the function of the state government. So be prepared, ladies and gentlemen, for the left to say, oh, it's because you don't want the federal government to have health care, and you don't want the federal government to provide health care, and you don't want the federal government to have a clean environment. No, folks, this is not what we're saying. We're saying this is not the function of the federal government. It is not their job. It's not what they're supposed to do in the Constitution. If the individual states choose to do that, they may do so. And guess what? Those state representatives will face the people because they are closest to the people. Closest. And when the people tire of those individuals, they will throw them out. And when they tire of how poorly run their state is, because they can't change the direction of their state, they will leave and they will move to another state that fits the kind of lifestyle and the kind of philosophy that they have, which is, by the way, anathema to what the Democrats believe. The Democrats do not want 50 choices. No, of course not. They don't want you to have 50 places to go. They want you to have one way, and it's their way. There is no diversity of thought allowed in the United States of America under Democrats. But to be fair, the Republicans at the federal level have also rapidly and vastly expanded government as well, to do far too many things. I mean, if you're a Republican congressman or you're a Republican United States senator, you're at the federal level, and let's just say, you believe that that certain things should be provided to individuals, for example, food stamps, as an example, okay? Why wouldn't you say, look, I agree that I don't want people to go hungry. That is why I want the states to take up this responsibility, because this is what the states are supposed to do, and let the states implement the program in those individual states that best solves this problem. So you'll probably have red states who, once they have that responsibility back within their state governments, may choose to say, you know what, let's have the churches and the synagogues. Let's have those places distribute food. Or let's try some alternative way. Or let's require people who are able-bodied to actually work. Okay? I mean, there are so many ways and so many different ideas, many of which none of us have thought of, that the states can invent and innovate, because states are incubators. They're supposed to be innovating. They're supposed to be trying the new things that might work to make their states operate and work better. But the thing is, in West Virginia, the thing that drives the economy other than tourism in West Virginia is obviously coal and coal mining. And we have a federal government that's saying, we want you to go away. We want you to die. We want you to not exist. We don't respect you. We don't think that you should have a right to make a living. Who does the federal government think that it is? That's why Article 5 exists. It exists for this reason, because the federal government has usurped, under Democrats and Republicans, far too much power from the people. and also by definition from the states. And the states have let it happen, and the people have let it happen. And the Republican Party, by the way, of which I'm a member, has also let it happen. The Democrats, forget it. I mean, they don't believe in limitation to government. But that's really what Article 5 is about. It's about government limitation, federal government limitation. And so we have the second clip from the West Virginia House of Delegates in the debate to pass a convention of states. And this, of course, is state number 18 to have passed the convention of states this year. And here is the second clip.
We have a government that has totally abdicated its responsibilities while delving into areas where it has no business.
They clearly do not represent us. Yet they retain their position for years and decades, and it's always by blaming someone else. Do you think they're going to limit themselves? They're using their power for personal financial gain while subjecting us to tremendous debt.
Imposing rules and regulations that would fill this room.
Especially here in West Virginia, they have destroyed our coal industry.
Over the last 20 years, our national debt has doubled twice under administrations of both parties.
75% of the population of the United States for decades in poll after poll has indicated a preference for term limits, and yet Congress will not take up the issue. Our situation is dire. We have over $100 trillion in unfunded liabilities.
So yes, we have $100 trillion of unfunded liabilities. We have a federal government that is trying to tell you what to do with every aspect of your life. We have a federal government that isn't living within its means. And of course, those are all important points that are brought up by these members of the House of Delegates in the state of West Virginia. And what caused me, podcast listeners, to discuss this issue today on the podcast is I got this article that was put in front of me from this magazine called Clean Technica. It's an online magazine nonetheless. And the article is titled, "Could a Convention of States Create Positive Outcomes for Clean Tech and the Environment?" Now, before I read some of this article, I want you to know this. The thesis of this article is that the clean tech, which is the folks who want you to only use wind and solar to power your house and only electricity to power your house and your car and every aspect of your lives, and you're not allowed to use any fossil fuels, and you're not allowed to use nuclear, you're not allowed to use anything but wind and solar, okay? The thesis of this article is that since the Convention of States, it seems to be gaining some steam and presents probably a threat to the clean tech industry, which has gotten its power through the federal government because it's being paid for by you and I through the federal government, through grants and loans and all this other nonsense. The clean tech industry, through this article, is basically saying, you know what we need to do? We need to co-opt the Convention of States industry. We need to get some of those like moderate Republicans who are pushing the Convention of States to include in their convention, once they get 34 states to sign on, clean energy as part of the Constitution of the United States. Literally, that's what they're saying. So in other words, they're not saying, hey, we support the idea of limiting the federal government. No, instead they're saying we like the idea of amending the Constitution of the United States to expand federal power. And so the article continues. A recent insider Business Insider article tells us about a movement afoot to amend the United States Constitution, but through a legal route that hasn't been used before, a Convention of States, as authorized by the document's 5th article. This process would bypass Congress, God forbid, and the federal government entirely, allowing representatives sent by state legislatures to make sweeping changes to the underlying code that runs the United States. The underlying code. Listen to that. It's not a code. It's a constitution. For this to happen, 34 state legislatures would have to vote for it. And there are 19 that have joined the club. So in other words, they're afraid. The left is afraid. The left, which controls the clean tech industry, because the whole purpose of clean tech in California, and the whole purpose of clean tech, as far as they are concerned, is to line their pockets, all right? And this is not to say that we ought not move towards a cleaner economy. I'm not arguing that, okay? If you want to do that, do it at the state level. All right? Go for it at the state level. I'm just saying it's not the federal government's job to do it. It's not the federal government's job to tax you and me and then take our money and then transfer it to people in this preferred industry because it's virtuous. It's not their job. If you want to do it in the state level, then fine. So be it. So the article continues. There's an obvious problem with each state getting one vote. Red states could easily outnumber blue states and transform the federal government. No, folks. The Convention of States is not trying to transform the federal government. They are trying to limit the federal government as it was intended to be limited in the United States Constitution. And the United States, with it, might be limited into a conservative-dominated entity. And these fears aren't entirely unfounded, as a video from West Virginia vote asking for such a convention shows. While the West Virginia versus EPA ruling stripped federal regulators of their power to regulate greenhouse gases, the constitutional amendments red states would probably want to pass could make the court decision look like an environmental dream. Or worse, a runaway convention could decide to adopt a strike-everything amendment and completely rewrite the United States Constitution from the ground up. So in other words, this article is saying that the Convention of States is a radical organization. And it's radical, according to Clean Technica, this magazine, because the Convention of States wants to do three basic things. Impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. How terrible. The Convention of States wants to impose fiscal restraints on the federal government? That would be a good thing. The Convention of States wants to limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. Yeah, and return that to states where it belongs and where it was always supposed to belong. And the Convention of States wants to limit the terms of office for its officials and for members of Congress. In other words, they want to limit the terms that you can serve in the United States Senate and the United States Congress. The Convention of States wants to also, of course, limit the federal bureaucracy and the administrative states' desire to constantly make law. All of that should be returned to the states. That is its purpose. So the article continues, and I'm not going to read the rest of it, but the gist of the article is what we need to do as clean tech people in the wind and solar business and the electric car business is to make sure that we co-opt that organization. And we co-opt it by convincing Republicans to put in the proposals for Convention of States, proposals that would require that we embed in the United States Constitution clean tech investments, right? I mean, utter nonsense. I mean, so what's next? We're supposed to embed in the Constitution the right to have cell phones? Of course not. That's the whole point of the Convention of States, is to limit these idiots who think that the power of the federal government is supposed to be limitless. And so Insider Magazine, Insider Magazine has an article titled, Republicans' Next Big Play is to Scare the Hell Out of Washington by rewriting the Constitution, and they're willing to play the long game to win. So this is a hit piece on the Convention of States, and continues as former Republican Senator Rick Santorum addressed Republican lawmakers gathered in San Diego at the American Legislative Exchange Council Policy Summit. He detailed a plan to fundamentally remake the United States. It would become a conservative nation. And the transformation, Santorum said, culminates with an unprecedented event, a first-of-its-kind convention to rewrite the Constitution. Quote, you take this grenade and you pull the pin, you've got a live piece of ammo in your hands, Santorum, a two-time GOP presidential candidate and former CNN commentator, said. And he explained it in the remarks obtained by the left-leaning watchdog group, the Center for Media and Democracy. Of course, let's assume that that's not even true, but whatever. That 34 states could pass this, and every Republican legislator votes for this, we have a constitutional convention. So interviews with a dozen people involved in the Constitutional Convention movement, along with documents and audio recordings reviewed by Insider, reveal a sprawling, well-funded, at least partly by cryptocurrency, and impassioned campaign taking root across multiple states. Well, it's more than multiple, I can tell you that right now. Notably fueling them, success. During an extraordinary few weeks in June, the Supreme Court's 3 new Trump appointees powered the reversal of Roe v. Wade. So you can see, these people, they hate Trump, they hate the Supreme Court, they hate the Constitution and the way it's supposed to function. And what they are, they're totally and utterly intimidated by the Convention of States. They show a map of the states where Convention of States has passed, where it's been proposed, where it has failed. And of course, the way state legislatures work is when a bill fails, you can just bring it up the next year. Okay? So in the states where we have COS, Convention of States, which we call COS, amendments moving forward in those states, or resolutions moving forward in those states, if they fail, you can just introduce it the following year. So Business Insider just does this massive hit piece on COS, which means they are incredibly worried because they're putting this hit piece in for Nancy Pelosi and for Chuck Schumer. So success of Convention of States causes threatened progressives to begin mainstream attacks. This is where we're going with this podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? The left is so scared of an Article 5 Convention of States that they're attempting to raise the alarm on the COS movement, which is halfway to convening a Convention of States. We're halfway there. Hit pieces are coming out in Business Insider and Clean Technica that I just read to you. And Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are coming out against it as well. In other words, the Convention of States is now in the mainstream. The left is waking up and realizing, oh my God, my power at the federal level as a federal bureaucrat or federally elected official could be taken away. Whereby if I got elected to Congress, if I got elected to the United States Senate or the House of Representatives, I would have actually very little power, because the vast majority of the authority and power would rest with the people and the respective states, not with the federal government, which is the whole purpose of the Convention of States. And so that really is the thesis of today's podcast, namely that the Article 5 Convention is threatening the left, and they are awakening that this could actually happen. You're halfway there, right? 19 states have passed it this year. West Virginia and South Carolina alone have passed the COS resolution. And now you just need to get across the finish line so you can get to 34, which would make perfect sense. And so we have a third clip from the West Virginia House of Delegates, during which the members of the House of Delegates were debating the COS resolution, which of course passed and is now law in West Virginia being the 18th state and South Carolina being the 19th to pass it. We have that clip, and here it is.
The direction that our country is heading right now is dangerous.
Our country's founders knew this was going to happen and put a way to stop it by providing Article 5 of our Constitution the means to allow the citizens to call for Convention of States.
The Founding Fathers, in their wisdom and brilliance, inserted this language so that the states would have an alternative method for proposing amendments, because they knew Congress would be unwilling to limit their own power.
This presents an opportunity for the state of West Virginia to be part of the solution.
Limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government and enforce fiscal restraint on the central government.
Only resolution that addresses the coal EPA regulations that are currently crushing our economy.
So today, you have a choice.
You're the line.
We're the only ones who can do this. Congress is not going to do it.
We must return to the rule of law. We must return to our constitutional republic.
It is time to require the federal government to relinquish its powers, not specifically outlined in the Constitution. The time has come to require Congress to live by the same laws that they pass. The time has come for the federal government to balance the budget, just as every American has to.
Yes, it's time for the federal government to balance its budget, just like every other American has to do. It's time for the federal government to stop telling us what kind of energy we are allowed to use and what kind of car we are allowed to drive and what kind of health care we are required to buy. Who do they think they are? Right? And I want to give the opposite side of that, right? In my home state of Maryland, the state of Maryland passed a law and wants to continue to strengthen laws that require you to only use electricity to power your business and your house. That is to say, they don't want you to use natural gas to power your house, to heat your house. They don't want you to use oil to heat your house, right? Like if you have a hot water heater system in your house, they wanted you to get rid of that. They don't even want you to have a backup generator that is run by natural gas or propane, which of course, generators are run by natural gas and propane, okay? They don't want you to have any of those things. And how are they going to try to stop you from doing it in my state of Maryland? By saying you are prohibited from refilling the existing tanks that you have with natural gas or with propane. So you can't have a gas fireplace in your house. You can't have a gas stove in your house. And so I want to be consistent here with the podcast listeners. I'm telling them about what they're doing in Maryland when it comes to this issue, because Maryland as a state has the right, I presume, the elected officials were elected and they could pass these types of laws. And guess what? I have the right to leave. I have the right to move somewhere else. I have the right to vote against those individuals. I have a right to debate those individuals and say that their ideas are stupid. Okay? But that is very different than the federal government telling my state or telling West Virginia, as an example, how you should power your homes, what kind of light bulb you should use in your house. Who does the federal government think that it is, right? I mean, I would even go so far as to say that the states shouldn't have that ability, but they do, okay? The states do. And that's why we have 50 states, because there are places of refuge that we can go, and there are a lot of them in this country. Because most of the states are red states. They are. They're red states. It's why the Democrats want to change the election laws, ladies and gentlemen, because they want to cheat. They want to change the Constitution because they don't want each state to have 2 United States senators elected. They don't want that. Of course they don't. And conversely, you have the red states, at least, by the way, not all of them, but an increasing number of them who are trying to finally say, we've had enough. We want an Article 5. And I'm talking about this today before I move on, and I want to finish this segment by just saying this. You know the left is noticing, and you know that they're threatened when Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer come forward and say, this is a problem, this is ridiculous, this is extremist. Imagine, right? It's extremist to say that you want the federal government to stop spending so much money and to live within its own budget. It's extremist to say that congressmen and senators should be term limited. It's extremist to say that the administrative state has no business making law and must be pushed back and the power must be returned to the states and to the people. To Democrats, that is extremist, because you don't have the right to live in a state that is uniquely has its own culture and its own laws that may very well be very different from where you live. By the way, that's kind of what makes this country a great place, right? Who wants the whole country to be the same? I don't. By same, I mean with the same laws. I mean, I want there to be places of refuge, and that is so important. Our founders wanted the people to retain the power, and that's why I asked you to sign up for the Convention of States. It is very noble. 19 states have done it so far. We're halfway there. We need to get across the finish line and finally, once and for all, return the power to the people. So next up, podcast listeners, the FBI director is in Congress today and is being questioned on election meddling. True story. So why this hasn't happened like a lot of times before, I'm not really sure. But in the Daily Wire, the FBI in the 2020 election meddling takes the center stage as Christopher Wray, he's the director of the FBI, readies his Senate testimony, which, is going on today. FBI Director Christopher Wray is expected to testify in front of the Senate on Thursday as he leads an agency battered by controversy and whistleblower allegations that the Bureau's work is deeply tainted by politics. You think? Some of the most pertinent questions Wray is expected to field involve allegations that high-up officials in the FBI meddled in the 2020 election, from covering up incriminating information about Joe Biden's family to overemphasizing the threat of domestic terrorism. In other words, in 2020, the FBI covered up Hunter Biden and Joe Biden's brother. They covered up their business dealings and their use of the federal government to enrich themselves and their connections from the federal government and from these elected officials. And at the same time in 2020, I'm not sure if you recall, the FBI decided that people who belong to patriot organizations and or patriotic organizations or militias were by definition domestic terrorists or suspected domestic terrorists. And this is how they tried to, the FBI, they had their hands on this election trying to convince people that individuals who thought that the federal government was too powerful and too strong, which of course it is, and too overbearing, which of course it is, and too in control of our daily lives, which it is, those individuals are a threat. So Wray took over as the head of the FBI in August 2017 after the firing of Director James Comey, whose legacy was marred by the FBI's handling of investigations of both of the major candidates in the 2016 presidential election. As FBI head, Wray said institutional reform is a priority. The FBI is dedicated to cleaning out internal bad actors and erecting safeguards to prevent a repeat of the failings of 2016, he told the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. In other words, the FBI has acknowledged that in 2016, they were actually spying, or some of their agents were at the very high level of the FBI, spying on the Trump campaign. So they're acknowledging it. It's like a secret service agency, if you will, that is, the secret police going around and spying on politicians to try to determine the outcome of an election. Accounts from whistleblowers and others suggest Wray has fallen short on his pledge to protect the FBI's credibility. Senate Judiciary Committee ranking member Chuck Grassley, who's a Republican from Iowa, sent a letter to Wray and Attorney General Merrick Garland last month, detailing whistleblower allegations that the FBI wrongly and duplicitously classified potentially damning information about Hunter Biden, the president's son. And they classified that information as disinformation. That is to say, they knew Hunter Biden was corrupt and is corrupt, and that Joe Biden is corrupt, and Joe Biden's brother is corrupt. They've all gotten wealthy from government. Doesn't seem possible, but they have. And, by doesn't seem possible, I mean, it doesn't seem possible that someone could continue so long in government and not be caught and charged and then arrested. But the FBI has looked the other way and said, no, all that stuff that you gave us that proves that this was happening, it was really Russian disinformation. And so in April, a West Virginia jury acquitted 2 men and hung on charges against 2 others that federal prosecutors alleged to have conspired to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer. And so there are also questions about this, right? Because the FBI was engaged in this particular event as well. So this matters, ladies and gentlemen, because today, it's not just that Christopher Wray is in front of the United States Congress testifying. It's also that in today's newspaper, in the New York Post, at the same time Christopher Wray is testifying, there is a front page article. Hunter Biden was involved in a 2018 deal to send grain from the Ukraine to China. So there we go again. The Ukraine is in the news, not because of this mysterious war between Russia and the Ukraine, and between, obviously, the United States is involved heavily in this as well by providing indirectly and directly technical support and weapons. And in the New York Post, Hunter Biden was involved in the 2018 deal to send grain from the Ukraine to China. So it says Hunter Biden was involved in 2018 in a project by Burisma Holdings to export grain from the Ukraine to China, a document from his abandoned laptop shows, right? So it's from his laptop. The scandal scarred the first son's signature, was among those on a Burisma board resolution dated July 27th, 2018. His signature that concerned the Sino-Ukrainian Silk Road grain port project. In addition to Hunter, 7 other members of Burisma's board of directors authorized their advisor, Vadim Pozarsky, to represent with all Chinese potential shareholders for development, negotiation, and contracting issues, as well as operation management of the project Sinot-Ukraine Silk Road grain port. Former CIA officer Joseph Coffer Black, a fellow Burisma board member, was also among those who signed off on the project, the document shows. So think about this. Hunter Biden is a drug addict and a complete loser, okay? He has been for his adult life, his entire adult life. And here he is, by some miracle, doing a grain deal between the Ukraine and China in 2018. A drug dealer, okay? Now, why on earth do you think Hunter Biden is able to do a grain deal between the Ukraine and China when he's a drug addict? Maybe because his last name is Biden. And then there's a CIA guy that's involved as well that was part of the board of Burisma. In addition to Hunter, 7 other members of Burisma's board of directors authorized their advisor, Vadim Pozarsky, to represent with all Chinese potential shareholders for the development and negotiation and containing this, et cetera, et cetera. So there's no further mention of the project on Hunter's laptop, and it wasn't really immediately clear if the grain was ever shipped. Yeah, so was he actually paid for it then? The revelation of Hunter's ties to the venture came a month after his father's administration accused China of stockpiling wheat amid a global food crisis fueled by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So, look, folks, think about this for a moment. Hunter was involved in a grain deal between the Ukraine and China. China, and that's 2018, China then mysteriously stockpiles wheat and grain that came from the Ukraine. Then, by some happenstance, Russia invades the Ukraine. And you don't think for 1 minute the United States of America isn't somehow involved in this? Or people at the very highest levels? And that the FBI with Christopher Wray, who's now, of course, the head of the FBI and is in front of the United States Congress testifying, shouldn't he be asked all these questions? Like, at what point did the FBI, not investigate this and charge these corrupt people? President Biden had predicted in March that the war would upend global wheat supplies since Russia and the Ukraine jointly account for about a fourth of the world's wheat exports, ladies and gentlemen. Hunter stepped down from the Burisma board in April of 2019. The same month, he abandoned his laptop in the Delaware repair shop because he said he didn't want to distract from his father's presidential bid, right? It's like, yeah, I don't want dad to really know. And I don't want the press to know or the voters to know what I've been doing, all this corrupt stuff. So I'm going to drop my laptop off to this repair shop in Delaware so that they can repair it. So that presumably I can then erase everything that's on it. I mean, this is when you know that you're dealing with a complete and utter drugged out drug addict and loser, because if he had a brain, what he would do is he would shred the laptop, right? He would just shred it. Why would you even try to repair it? You'd shred it. But he probably has a lot of important documents on the laptop from his other corrupt business dealings, so he needed to retrieve them, And the FBI, of course, allegedly has had this laptop for for years and has done nothing. Done nothing. The Post examination, the New York Post examination, that is, of the infamous laptop has since exposed how a myriad of Hunter's foreign business dealings unfolded with his father when his father was Barack Obama's vice president. Interesting. The dealings, which President Biden has repeatedly denied any knowledge of, are almost certainly part of the ongoing Justice Department's probe into Hunter, which has reportedly reached a critical stage. Oh, sure. Pozharskyi, the advisor referenced in the China-Ukraine grain deal, is the same guy who sent Hunter an email thanking him for introducing him to then Vice President Biden in Washington in April of 2015. Additional documents uncovered from the laptop shows that Pozharskyi had been invited to a dinner arranged by Hunter so that Biden could meet his overseas business partners from the Ukraine, Russia, and Kazakhstan. Folks, this was happening when Biden was vice president under Obama. They were enriching themselves on grain deals and other kinds of deals in the Ukraine and with the Ukraine while Biden was vice president. And then, miraculously, Russia invades the Ukraine after China stockpiles a bunch of wheat from the Ukraine. It's really, I'm not saying that I have the answers as to how all this went down. What I'm saying to you is we have some serious corruption at the very highest levels of our government. I mean, I'm stating the obvious, But the problem is the law enforcement agencies aren't doing their jobs. And is it because the CIA was involved in all of this too? Were high-ranking CIA officials involved in this, and were they using Hunter Biden to try to get some intel, and so therefore Hunter is a useful idiot and therefore shouldn't be charged? Nonsense. I mean, let's just say that's somehow true. Still nonsense. Since when do you use a vice president's son to try to get information? Additional documents uncovered by the laptop show that Pozharskyi had been invited to a dinner arranged by Hunter, introducing him to, of course, VP Biden. The Biden administration categorically denied meeting between Biden and Pozharskyi at a swanky Cafe Milano that took place at the Post after the Post reported it in October of 2020. Dad will be there, but keep that between us for now. Thanks, Hunter emailed one guest 3 weeks before the dinner. So here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. You have Christopher Wray, the FBI director, in front of the United States Congress, testifying about why the FBI is asleep on this particular matter. Meanwhile, we are very close to war, of course, with Russia because we are supporting the Ukraine. This is a proxy war at a minimum from the United States of America in the Ukraine. And Russia is directly engaged, obviously, in war in the Ukraine. And you have to ask yourself the question, was all of this planned? Is it just really happenstance since we've been involved with the Ukraine via Biden and probably Obama since the Obamas were in charge of the White House and president of the United States? According to documents on the laptop, President Biden met with at least a dozen of Hunter's business partners, including in China, when Biden flew with his son to Beijing aboard Air Force Two in 2013. The purpose of Biden's trip was an official vice presidential visit with the newly elevated President Xi Jinping, because that's when Xi became president of China. Biden has been accused of going soft on China amid his son's ongoing scandals and more recently ahead of the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. The president urged Pelosi to cancel her trip, insisting that the military thinks it's not a good idea right now. So, look, we know that President Biden and Hunter Biden are compromised. We know that President Biden's brother is compromised. But really the most important thing in this story, ladies and gentlemen, is that we have our intelligence agencies or certainly certain individuals in those agencies that are engaging in some corrupt practices. And we have, at the same time, the FBI that is engaging in corrupt activities and are wanting to put their finger on the scale of elections by not going after individuals like Hunter who have clearly broken the law. And we still don't have all of the information. Like, you've got the New York Post, probably Fox News, maybe a few other news outlets, obviously many, many podcasts, but the mainstream media, they are silent on this. And how do you ever get a clean government? How do you ever clean up government if you don't have a media that is even remotely interested in reporting and asking kind of like the basic questions, which is, why would a drug addict who's the son of the vice president and then the son of the president be involved in the Ukraine for so many years where there is now a major war going on? How did all that come about? We need to continue to ask these questions, and we need to continue to push back on our all-powerful and out-of-control federal government and the out-of-control federal agencies and the out-of-control and power-hungry corrupt members, not all of the members, but certain of those individuals at the FBI. And I want to make that distinction, okay? The FBI employs many, many people. There are many, many good men and women there. But unfortunately, it sure seems like the worst group of people at the FBI are at the highest levels and have been for far too long. And I don't know how you get rid of those individuals or go after them and prosecute them and so forth. I'm not sure how that is fixed, other than oversight from the United States Congress with Christopher Wray in there. I mean, that's probably the primary way. But unless you have a media that's even remotely interested in reporting it, it won't ever get fixed because no one ever knows it's actually happening. And that's the last word for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Getter, Truth Social, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.